A very, very warm welcome to another Action for Happiness live event. My name is Mark Williamson. Absolutely delighted to see so many of you joining us from all around the world as always. And I'm particularly happy to be welcoming here a great friend, Dr. Kelli Harding. Kelli, great to see you.
Mark, it is such a pleasure to be here with you and with the entire Action for Happiness community.
Well, thank you so much for making time for this. And I'm really excited about our event today called Feel Better with Kindness. I've loved the previous events we've done together. But when we were talking about doing this event, you reminded me of something that we always try to do at the start of Action for Happiness team meetings and that you've experienced when you've met with us, called the sort of check-in. And you said, why don't we do this at the start of our event together? So before I even have a chance to introduce you properly, I'm just going to share this with us two together, but also with the whole audience. So what we do with the check-in is we begin with a mindful pause. So wherever you are right now, just take a moment. May have been a busy day, maybe the beginning of a new day. Just take a few deep breaths and tune into how you're feeling right now. Just notice the air coming in and out. Just notice how your body feels. And after a few moments of mindfulness, we move on to two other parts of the check-in. The first is to share something about how we're feeling, and the second is to share something we're grateful for. So Kelli and I will do this together now, but I'd encourage you, wherever you are right now, to think about one thing about how you're feeling and also one thing you're grateful for. So I am feeling a little bit all over the place. I had a bicycle accident last week. I was knocked off my bike by a car. I'm still in quite a lot of pain from that. But I'm also really grateful to have had a really full and productive day and delighted to have the chance to work with so many inspiring people and to get home and see my family at a time when so many people elsewhere in the world perhaps are struggling with fearing for their lives. It really makes life seem more precious. So that's how I'm doing right now. Kelli, over to you. How are you feeling?
I am feeling grateful that you are okay from that accident. That's really unnerving, and it's wonderful that you're here with us today. We're all grateful for that. And I'm also feeling fired up because I really love this community and I love talking about kindness, and I'm really happy to share our conversation today.
That's great. And I can see some people are already sharing how they're feeling and what they're grateful for in the chat as well. So thank you folks for checking in with us all together with this big community. So Kelli, it's a delight to have you with us. You are, of course, a medical professional, a sort of clinical psychiatrist by background, and worked in emergency rooms and all kinds of amazing sort of frontline expertise and experience. But you've also got this interest and indeed huge expertise now in kindness and how that relates to every aspect of our health. And your book, The Rabbit Effect, is one of my favorites. Perhaps you could start by letting us know a bit about your background and what brought you to this topic we're talking about today.
Sure. So I wanted to learn absolutely everything I could about health when I went to medical school. And I thought that meant learning absolutely everything about the brain and body. And when I got to the wards and started meeting all the people that we were serving, I realized that there was this real mismatch between what I was reading in textbooks about disease and then what was actually happening. And I got super interested in the outliers, the people who, despite serious illnesses, were continuing to feel and function well. And I also got really interested in folks who were really struggling and we couldn't find anything, on their labs or medical tests that described exactly what was going on. And this led me on this path of study to try to figure out, what is it? What are we missing in health? And actually, it was a long road, but it led me to kindness. And now that I know the answer, I want to tell everybody because it affects each and every person who's on this call.
Well, that's inspiring to hear, and I want to delve into that a bit more. So before I do that, just a reminder to everyone who's joined us for this event, there will be a chance to ask Kelli questions, so please do use the Q&A function, and It's lovely to see so many people already talking on the chat. Let's keep that kind and supportive and relevant to the conversation, as you always do. We're also going to be asking you to sort of get involved with a few interactive things along the way, folks. So please, as always, looking forward to seeing your contributions. But Kelly, you've just talked about how you realized in that journey the importance of kindness. Maybe you could just sort of help us understand a bit more about this. Why, some people might dismiss kindness as a sort of soft, fluffy irrelevance. Why do you think it's so important?
Well, so here's the thing. So kindness is an essential and often overlooked part of health. We know that healthcare is far more, we know that health is far more than healthcare, and it's also far more than even things like diet, exercise, and sleep. And even genes are found to be far more malleable than we once understood, thanks to the awesome and emerging field of epigenetics. So this really led to this question of, well, what is then the major contributor to our health? And what was so surprising about it is that there are decades of evidence that show that the biggest factor in our health and human health is actually our everyday social world. So this means how we're treated in our homes, in our relationships, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, our communities, and broader society matters deeply for our health. This is what we call in public health the social determinants of health. And what I think is really neat about that, it's actually what you and I and every single person and every child on this planet also knows as the positive connection of kindness. And, this makes sense because humans are innately social creatures, and we know that kindness buffers stress. We also know that kindness does things like lower blood pressure, it lowers pain, it lowers symptoms of anxiety and depression, and boosts our immune system. And we know that kindness can buffer, diseases that come, and also challenges that we face in our daily lives. I probably don't even have to explain this to the people on the call. Just think of a moment where you felt, you're going through a tough time and you felt some comfort with somebody caring and kind by your side. Could be a friend or a family member. It could be a neighbor or, a doctor. It could even be a pet. I have to say, sometimes it's even somebody who's a complete stranger who just happens to say the right thing at the right time. You may even want to, in your heart, just take a second and wish them a little gratitude for that. It's really exciting though. And I feel like that's the part that I really just want to stress, that to be able to say that it turns out, looking at all this evidence, that the essence of health is actually happening in our everyday interactions in our life. And what's really exciting about this, and why I feel so passionate, and I go around talking to so many people about this, and including physicians too, and people who work in healthcare, is that what this means is that we're all actively playing a role, and that we all have the opportunity to improve the health of this world with our actions, and tiny actions of kindness oftentimes. So, it could be as simple as like, a hug you give to your child or a friend. It could be, cheering on a coworker. It could be helping out a neighbor or planting some flowers around you. It could be standing up when you see something that's unfair and standing up for fairness. And it can also be feeling a part of a community that inspires you. And I think I just really want to say thank you to Action for Happiness for providing that. It's a beautiful model of exactly that kind of positive social connection that is really great for health.
Thanks, Kelly. I love just the sort of enthusiasm you bring to this to remind us about how our everyday interactions and how we treat each other has this just really transformative power for us, but also we have these ripples that affect the people around us. I also love the sort of reflection you were getting us to do then. So I wonder if maybe we could just do that as a community together now. So maybe, as Kelly was just encouraging us, folks, try and think about an act of kindness that you felt or experienced, or maybe one that you did. Just bring to mind something kind that you've experienced recently, or indeed longer ago, if that's relevant. And I would love it, well, we would both love it if you might share some examples in the chat that we can just take a look at, because I think it's always so heartwarming to see stories of kindness at a time when we're bombarded with quite the opposite in much of the media that we see. So I'm just going to look at some of these as they come up on the screen. When my husband hugged me, friend making a meal for me after I lost my baby, told someone how amazing they were, shared bunches of daffodils with people, hugged my boss when she was upset today. My badminton coach asked if I was better after COVID. When my kids come over and help me. Once I was crying and my cat comforted me, holding the door open for people, care from a nurse, seeing a 5-year-old help another 5-year-old, a stranger grabbing my arm to help me in the street, baking something for my son and husband. I'm struggling to read these because they're flying past so quickly. Hugging a friend in need, sticking with my boundaries, smiling at somebody and them smiling right back. How are you feeling as you hear this lovely list of kind acts, Kelly?
Heartwarming. I think that's the part that's so wonderful about this work. And Mark, I have to say, and that's what's kind of so awesome about kindness. It's both giving and receiving, and hearing all these stories brings that warm sense of connection. And I hope other people on the call are experiencing that too. I'm curious, do you want to share any recent kindness experiences that come to mind?
Well, there's one personal one from this bike accident when people rushed over to see if I was okay. And although the driver himself was at fault and was clearly shaken up, did check in with me by calling back later on to see how I was. So there's those little things that, you appreciate that when you're struggling. But I've also been struck by something I think we'll come on to in this conversation about the sort of rush of kindness in response to the tragic events happening in Ukraine right now. I mean, I know there's always conflicts and humanitarian crises happening, but what's going on right now has touched so many of our hearts and lives. And what I've been touched by, as well as being deeply affected by the sadness and trauma of it, is also the amazing acts of kindness and bravery and courage and humanity and compassion that we see. So I feel both at the personal level and also as I look around me, yes, there's much I wish was different in the world, but I do think there's a human instinct here to sort of care and protect and to reach out to people we perhaps don't know at all. That's what's so amazing about it.
It is.
What about you, Kelly? What have been your recent experiences of kindness?
Well, it's funny. I actually had a challenging morning the other day, and it was kind of like one of those days where it feels like everything that could go wrong just was going wrong in a row. And it was funny because I was at the coffee shop, and I've made it part of my kindness practice to always ask people how their day's going. And I chatted with the fellow for a little bit, and then he gave me an extra cookie. And it's funny because I realized it was a small thing, but I have to say it was like exactly when I needed it right then and there, and it totally lifted my mood. And I, went on to continue with everything. So that's the thing. You just never know when someone really needs something little, and it takes almost no time. And everything from a cookie to a smile makes a difference.
Yeah, so you've really shared how that felt for you as well, I think. So you can see that made a difference to you. So I wonder if we could maybe turn back to the community and ask, so you've shared some of the kind things you've seen or done recently. How do you feel in those, or how do you feel about that, receiving kindness or seeing kindness or giving kindness? Maybe you'd like to share that on the chat, folks. Let's see what comes up. Loved, valued, believed in, grateful, empowered, true love, hopeful, warm, seen, glowing, that I'm not alone, hopeful for the world, like I matter, serenity, happy, cared for, smiling. I love doing something nice. I feel connected, contentment, wanted, thankful, being acknowledged, loved, and valued. My heart feels bigger. Wow, my heart feels bigger just reading that list, actually.
Seriously, calm restores faith in humanity. We all need that throughout the day, and that people are lovely. This is really fantastic. And so what that feeling is, and I think that's what's important about this, is positive social connection. And that's where, we just have kindness is this way of expressing positive social connection, and it's a two-way street. And what's so great about it is, we know from the data that positive connection to others and all these different ecosystems of our lives really makes a difference in our health, even far more than traditional factors that we think about, like things like being severely overweight, or high blood pressure, and even smoking. It's been shown to have a robust effect. So I think it's easy to overlook, and it's really important to focus on. And I think the other thing that I want to say, because I know loneliness has really been amplified during the pandemic, is that there are many ways to connect. And some of those ways are deep ways with people that are close to us. And then there's also ways to connect with people that, like this morning, I live in New York City, but I've made a point, knowing all this data, that even just saying hello to people in your neighborhood can boost a feeling of community and connection. And so I've started doing that. And it's funny because, here are these people come sometimes with very sort of dour faces, and you say hello, and it's like their face brightens. You say good morning, they feel good. It seems like I feel good, and maybe they'll pass that on too. So even those little bits of connection have been studied, and it turns out all of them count towards our health. They're all good. You can't get too much of it.
Yeah, and you talked briefly earlier on about the sort of connection between mind and body, which I think we used to think of slightly as alternative, but of course what the mainstream science is realizing is that anything that's good for our mental well-being and emotional health actually has these amazing physiological impacts as well. And I think I'm right to say, but maybe you could say a bit more, that one of the things we overlook in the context of healthcare is the importance of the relational side. So, you might go and see your doctor and they tell you have a problem and they give you a medicine and you go away with a prescription. But actually, the way that person makes you feel heard, makes you feel empowered and so on, like some of the comments in the chat, must make a big difference. And I believe it's right to say that if we spent less time doing randomized control trials of the different drugs and more time thinking about the different ways that we could treat people as humans and how we could show kindness and help them feel connected, that actually in some ways that might make an even bigger difference to their health. What's your experience of that?
Well, I think we can make it both. We can do the lab science, and we can try to really create this space for that human connection in our interactions, whether it's in healthcare, and frankly, if it's also in your workplace. We all get so busy in all the different areas of our lives, but it's really these moments of connection and shared purpose that can often be quite powerful. And I think what's exciting about this is, particularly for clinicians, so many people tell me that this really resonates with them, and what they love about medicine, what brought them into healthcare, was that ability to be by somebody's side while they're having a hard time and help get them through. And that for me is really heartwarming and powerful.
So I can see how, in the context of healthcare, workplaces, as you said, and in our communities, and I'd like to come back to communities, there's lots that we can do. But what about sort of in our daily lives? We're all here as human beings, as individuals. Have you got any top tips on how we can sort of practice an attitude of kindness that can help us, well, both feel better ourselves and have this impact day to day? You've given a few examples. What are some of your favorite top tips?
Well, first of all, I just want to come at this with the mindset that there are not kind people and unkind people in the world. And I think in a way, this is like totally liberating, because, we are all human beings, and we all have capacity for kindness, and we also all have capacity for unkindness. So we do know that the research shows people tend to be kinder when they're not in a rush. So, doing what you can to kind of slow down. And actually that exercise we did at the beginning of this meeting is perfect. And I've actually, since the pandemic started, I've started doing that, whether I'm teaching a class, whether I'm running a meeting, even sometimes at dinner with the family, just sort of taking a moment to settle, to quiet your mind, to be mindful of what's going on around you. And with that comes infinitely more capacity to be kind. And the reason for that is actually a shift in the brain. We're, getting away from some of those fear and flight centers and moving more to our higher cognitive functioning. And, the reality is right now, there's a lot of fear in the world. So the more that we can do exercises to kind of ground us in the moment, the better.
Well, let's just come on to that, because as you say, there is a lot of fear in the world. And right now we're, really disturbed by a situation of war, not that far from where I am in the UK, but also what feels like scenes of desperate unkindness. And I guess in some ways, as we said, we've seen much kindness in response to atrocity, but also there's a sense that kindness might be a bit weak, it might not be enough. So I wondered how you feel about kindness, or it through the lens of standing up to injustice, and how kindness can be actually, as I've heard it said, a form of strength rather than of weakness. How do you see that?
So I think kindness is the ultimate strength. And, part of that comes from, how do you navigate? We all deal with conflict every single day. It comes up in some capacity. And, some conflicts are shared conflicts. Some are more interpersonal. That said, when you're able to deal with a situation and address it, and still treat the person or group that you're feeling upset with dignity, that is an incredible kindness skill. And what's nice about it is the skill of conflict resolution is something that's quite teachable, and there are different strategies for it. And how do you do that in a way? Because, our human brains, we talked a little bit about the fear centers and the amygdala, and I know you've talked about that on other episodes, but, when we are in a situation where we feel afraid, it's easier to, if someone's violent towards us, to match back with violence. But actually, if we want to overall reduce violence, there are strategies to try to solve conflicts in nonviolent ways. And it's not easy. I know, Mark, you and I were talking about some extraordinary nonviolent ways that you've seen people address conflict. Like, I think it was the grandmothers.
Yeah, one example I saw was just I'm not sure if it was mothers or grandmothers, but in Ukraine, confronting, invading soldiers, Russian soldiers, and there was a sort of, let's have a conversation. Here's a phone so you can call home and talk to your parents. And it sort of, for all the desperate nature of conflict with an aggressor, the sense that actually there's human beings here, and actually probably many rather confused Russians in a country they thought was a fellow comradeship country, now in a situation they never expected to be in, taking orders they don't want to pursue. And that's really awful for everyone involved. And so responding to that with humanity and conversation and a cup of tea, and making your point known, is just one example of that. I mean, I was really moved to see things like I think it was Polish mothers who'd taken a whole row of buggies along to the train station, so that Ukrainian families or mothers arriving with kids had a buggy to use. It's just these little heart-wrenching reminders of the humanity that's involved in this just desperate situation. But as someone, I think it said, whenever there's trouble, look for the helpers, and actually they're everywhere, really. How are you feeling about kindness in the sense of it's linked to social action?
Well, so, health, social justice is a big part of public health. And actually, we know in terms of thinking about kindness, that sometimes the reasons we see poor health outcomes actually have to do with inequities and, everything from racism and beyond, particularly in the US, and access to care and things like that. So, acknowledging inequities and trying to help solve them and being part of that solution to add more kindness to the world is, part of the mission of trying to make the world a healthier place, for sure. I think, the other thing that I think about just with the conflict that's going on is, even if you're not somewhere directly to be able to help in a conflict, the fallout is felt everywhere. And so people that you meet, you have no idea sort of how something that's happening in a different part of the world may be affecting them. And it kind of gets to that idea that, and I know this in my role in mental health, is you really never know what someone else is struggling with or has struggled with. And so, be a little kinder than necessary would be my thought, where you can. Especially, it's been a really tough 2 years. There's been so much loss, so much disappointment, so much everything, economic stress, all of it. So just right now, we really need to be a little kinder than necessary. And
Love
that's
that.
not just to others, but to ourselves too.
Be a little kinder than necessary. And in some ways that links really nicely to the mission of Action for Happiness and what this community that we're here together with today is working on. And many of you will know that the sort of three words that underpin the mission of Action for Happiness are happier, kinder, together. That this is somehow about our own well-being as a foundation, but that actually kindness, and the happiness of others is part of that. And that the togetherness means both in terms of caring about ourselves and others, but it also means that all these things are best done in community. And of course, the COVID situation has been terrible at sort of wrenching us apart from each other. And now, fortunately, many of us are having the chance to reconnect face to face and so on. It feels to me that this togetherness, this sort of just general sense of camaraderie, friendship, looking out for each other is needed more than ever, but also has such a potential opportunity to make things better. What are your thoughts on community kindness and how we can make a difference right where we live?
Well, I think one of the things I was just going to say that's been an actual silver lining of the pandemic is it's been so tough on everyone that now mental health and emotional health is something that is getting talked about much more frequently. And we talked a little bit about the mind-body connection, and it wasn't so long ago that was considered kind of out there. And now it's really seen as a core part of health, and mental health is, of course, a part of health. For many people, they may know that the number one cause of disability around the world is actually depression. I think mental health, it went from 1% to 2% of all health aid this year, which is a big increase, but it's still really small. And I think it gets to that, in the past, mental health had been really stigmatized and not seen so essential to, who we are, how we deal with things, how we deal with illnesses and diseases that develop. So I'm encouraged. We're having much more open conversations about it in places I would have never have imagined. I had a conversation with the Surgeon General, and he's in the US, and Vivek Murthy, and he is talking about mental health and mental health of young people in particular, and what we can do to strengthen that. And especially when it comes to mental health of young people, that preceded the pandemic. There's been a lot of challenges. So I am hopeful that we are truly at a turning point.
I feel that the conversations about emotional health and how we're feeling have really taken off. I was just trying to find something I just saw in the chat, which I thought linked back nicely to your point about, be a bit kinder than necessary. Lynn said, my mum must have said this thousands of times when I was growing up, be kind, for everyone is fighting a hard battle. And I've repeated it to my kids and now to my grandchildren. And I think there's that so often when we see people doing unkind things, we want to shut them down and defend ourselves from them. And that's, of course, an understandable response. But as someone else said in the chat, it's hurt people that hurt people. And if we can respond to that trauma with a bit more kindness, we might just, or at least to recognize that other people are dealing with things that we perhaps aren't aware of. And to have that sense of empathy is a really important point.
And actually, you mentioned the word trauma, and that's something that I feel like people are talking a lot more about, and this sort of moving to what's wrong with somebody to what's happened to somebody, because the reality is trauma is extraordinarily common. And, practice it actually is every other person you pass on the street has had something adverse in their childhood happen, and that impacts us in different ways in our behaviors and how we trust other people. So being mindful of that can really add some compassion to what feels like a difficult situation.
It feels to me, Kelly, that one of the kind of skills that we can most offer is listening, is sort of creating a space where people around us have the chance to share how they're feeling and to feel valued and seen and appreciated, and all those things that were said in the chat. How can we learn to listen and make people feel more heard as an act of kindness?
That's a great question. I actually love the chat because I'm seeing lots of great ideas around that in particular. But I think, particularly in healthcare, a lot of times it's like we want to do something to fix the problem. And the reality is that a lot of times just being there, listening to someone's concern truly helps a situation feel more tolerable. And, just being aware, like we talked about, there's fallout and stress in all different ways, and you never know when someone needs that ear. So inviting those opportunities and staying open to it. So it was really interesting. The other day, I was talking with a waiter and I asked him, "How's your day going?" And ended up hearing about a really incredible and difficult time he had had during the pandemic, and he was now on the other side of it. And it just felt like this incredible shared moment with the stranger, essentially. And I feel like those kinds of opportunities are open to us all the time if we're paying attention. And they happen in so many different ways throughout our lives, with people we are close to already, but could find out new things about, or, with people we're just meeting. So I do want to mention, because I know it's Mindfulness March, and I think we are better listeners when we are paused and mindful and being in the moment. So I just want to say how much I value that. And I feel like, particularly when it comes to thinking about how we can create more inner peace, studies show that people are happier when they're living in the moment, and half the time our brains are somewhere else. So whatever we can do to draw our attention back to that present moment is great. And I know there's lots of great tips on the Action for Happiness calendar too.
Thank you for mentioning that, Kelly. Yes, we're in Mindful March, and if you haven't already seen that, please do check out Mindful March on the Action for Happiness website, full of ideas. Because you're right that when we pause before we respond, we're more likely to be able to respond kindly, I think. Now, something that's been going on in the UK, which you may not be aware of, is something called the Kindness Test, which is the BBC were involved in, which is a huge nationwide survey. And in fact, today, or maybe it was yesterday, they published some of the initial findings. And two things from this huge 65,000 person survey of kindness struck me that I wanted to sort of check in with you on. One was they asked people, when do they most often have a chance to show kindness? And the most common answer was when somebody asks for help. And it seems so blindly obvious, but it makes me think that, I know I struggle with this, but actually we're sometimes really bad at asking for help. And yet actually when we do that, we're giving people a chance to show kindness. And unless we do that asking, others may not know. So I wondered how you felt this sort of balance between offering help versus asking for help.
Yeah, so I love that was actually one of the findings, because that's very eye-opening. And it's true, it's really hard to ask for help sometimes, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because something that's also important for health is that we all need to have a sense of meaning and purpose, and being kind to others can feel very much like a sense of purpose. And, sometimes in my work, I found people who've been experiencing illness and they have lots of people being kind to them. It's also important for them to have an opportunity to be kind to others. And so, creating those situations where it's reciprocal is actually for the benefit of everyone. And it reminds me of there's studies in nursing homes, even taking care of a plant. Like, we just innately as human beings want to take care, and we feel good about it, and it helps in other capacities too.
I love that. And then the other aspect of this study that struck me was, when asked what are the biggest barriers to offering kindness, a lot of people said, well, I worry that my kind act may be misinterpreted, that people might sort of reject it or not want it, or I might have misunderstood, or I might embarrass myself. But when they asked people whether they actually ever did experience that, when they were kind, it was very rare. So we tend to assume that our kindness might be misunderstood, but in practice, when we are kind, it tends to go pretty well. I wonder if you had any observations on that sort of how we sometimes don't allow ourselves to show kindness.
If you're holding back in some capacity,
Mm,
and you wonder sort of the setting may be important too, is this
yeah.
in a workplace, is it at home or in a neighborhood somewhere? So one of the things that you can do that is helpful and been shown to be a technique is to ask permission. You could say, would it be okay if I helped you out with this? And maybe the person will say no, but a lot of times they're quite grateful for the assistance. Or if you're want to help someone maybe with something that you think of, you could ask, would it be okay if I shared with you what I was thinking about this? And that in itself can be a conversation starter.
Mm.
Um,
I
and
love
I,
it.
I'm oh, go
No,
ahead.
sorry, carry on.
I was just caught by what Michelle had written in the chat about struggling to ask for help, but that you love helping other people. And I think that's really true. And I suspect probably for a community that studies kindness, that studies happiness, we may be a lot of the givers. And I think the other piece of that is just making sure that you're also directing it towards yourself. And I think, sometimes, especially, kindness and helping can be stressful sometimes. So you also want to make sure that you're creating recovery periods for yourself to, after an intense period of doing an activity, checking your own energy levels and making sure that you create little mini breaks for yourself. And it can be, something fun like, actually, I was just talking with someone who said they love going to dog parks, is how they sort of reset themselves, or, or calling up a friend, or even just texting a friend can sometimes be a helpful way to do that, or truly take a vacation. People show that like true vacations, time off from whatever activity you're doing, actually boosts your productivity and your mental energy, which I found great.
I love that. And it's a really good link to the next one of these events with Dr. Chris Irons on self-compassion, which is on the 22nd of March. So
Yeah.
do join us again for that. But I'm seeing more people making this point that you said just then about struggling to ask for help. The thing that really changed that for me was when I realized that in asking for help, I was giving people a chance to experience the helper's high, which I love myself. And it's like, oh, actually,
Ah.
me asking for help is sort of an act of kindness, because that other person then gets the boost of helping me. So instead of me thinking it's a selfish thing to ask, I sort of realized it was a generous thing to ask. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And actually it's reminding me of Ben Franklin, who's an American who lived a while ago but had a lot of wisdom. Apparently used to ask people for help intentionally because we like people more who ask us for help, which I thought that really sort of flew in the face of conventional wisdom. But I mean, if it bonds you to someone else in a way and they get that helper's high, like we should all be asking for help. And
Mm.
hopefully we're feeling more comfortable asking for help when we're not feeling so great too.
Yeah, Tracy's just put in the chat, asking for help feels like weakness, but in fact, it's a sign of strength. But it also does, the
Yeah,
point you just made does link.
nice.
I'd like to come to the Q&A now because there's some great questions. But Michelle has asked, or she said she's a great believer in kindness, but sadly, some people take advantage of kind people, and what sometimes a positive thing can turn negative. What are your thoughts on this? And I guess she's asking, how can we protect ourselves from being taken advantage of when we're a kind person?
It's sometimes contextual, but I guess what I would say is erring on the side of kindness, recognizing when somebody takes advantage of that, that's often more about them than about you. The other thing that is important is boundaries. And, I think right now it can feel like it's a chaotic world. There's a lot going on. You need to try to create that, as Gwendolyn Brooks said, that velvet peace in yourself. Like how can you sort of create something that feels a little bit untouchable? And so being mindful if somebody feels like they're taking advantage of your kindness in some capacity and it's happening repeatedly, then that's a good time to sort of really think about maybe how you could put in some of those boundaries or talk to somebody else about what's going on. Um, Yes,
Yeah,
and I'm seeing
that's a really
Tracy
good answer,
agrees.
and it links to Deanna's asked a similar question about protecting our own emotional safety, which I think is kind of what you've just described, isn't it? Sort of sense of like, what are my boundaries? What are the things that I need to make sure I am able to say no to or step away from, while still doing that in a way that's in true to our value of kindness as well.
Yeah. And actually this has really serious consequences too, because I think, particularly for people that are in some sort of caregiving role, we can very often, whether it's intentional or unintentional, sometimes experience burnout, get to the work, not be able to have that recovery period. And so also setting boundaries and seeing it when it's happening to somebody else sometimes can be an act of kindness in itself. And so trying to create not just individual practices that help with that, but also, systems practices in whatever your workplace might be, or school or other places.
Thanks, Kelly. Do remember, everyone, that you can not only post your own questions in the Q&A, but you can also vote on other people's questions and they pop up towards the top of the list. Seamus has sort of made the point that you've been talking about how kindness to others brings health benefits, but what about the benefits of kindness towards ourselves in terms of health? Is there a connection between self sort of kindness and our physical health as well?
Oh, I should be really clear about that. So the benefit goes both ways. So, and that's what I think makes this so awesome, is that all these different areas of our lives, when we contribute kindness, we are not only contributing to the kindness of the situation around us, but also to ourselves. And, and that's the thing. It's like, it's not a small impact that all of these things are having. It's actually quite tremendous, and it's buffering other situations that come up. So, yes, please. That is a critical point. And I'm so glad that Seamus mentioned that, because I would not want anyone to walk away without that understanding, that it really is reciprocal.
That's a nice bridge to Sarah's question, or maybe it's Sarah. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And it's sort of building on this point about the balance between sort of kindness and boundaries. Sometimes being good to ourselves means not being too kind with others. So how do we distinguish between respecting ourselves rather than being selfish?
And again, I think it gets at if you feel like you're being taken advantage of in some capacity, if you're being physically hurt in some capacity, or if you're feeling emotionally hurt in some respects, you have to pay attention to that and do what you can to safely set boundaries around that, and try to reach out for help where you can.
Thanks, Kelly. Just a really practical example of that for me, which is perhaps not so much around boundaries and safety, but more about day to day, which is as someone who feels that they like to be kind to others, I have a sort of tendency to want to people please and say yes to things. And I discovered that was leading me to feel burned out. So for me, a real challenge was learning to say no to a request, because I knew I didn't have capacity, but still to do that in a kind way. Because in my mind, it had always been saying no means I'm a bad person. But actually, no, that means I can't be good I can't help people I want to help because I'm just sort of burnt out. So it was, how can I say no, but in a way that was really showing respect and kindness and explaining why I still value the person, but I can't do that right now for these reasons. And that was a life changer for me, because it was about boundaries, but still doing it in a way that was true to how I wanted to be. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, Mark, actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's true. Saying no is often very kind, both for yourself and the other person, because the problem is, if you are overcommitted and overstretched, you're not going to be able to do, you're not going to be able to fulfill what they would like, and you may do it in a way that actually harms the relationship if it's not done well. So yes, I'm a huge fan of saying no. And then the other thing is, because when you say yes to too much, there's an opportunity cost, and you miss out on things that you really love, or spending time with people you love. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really that time with people you love that's most meaningful oftentimes.
Now, the next question I'm seeing on my list is from Joshua French, who I'd like to take a moment to show some kindness to, because Joshua has been involved with Action for Happiness since back at the start of the launch. He helped found or co-found our Brighton group, and has done so much over many years to help create happy cafes and support local events, and is now at the heart of our team supporting our volunteers. So Joshua, lovely to have you with us this evening. And he's asked, and thank you for all you're doing. Josh is saying, I'd love to learn more about the power of sending passionate thoughts. For example, is sending positive wishes to people in a conflict zone worthwhile? Does this do any good in the world other than helping us feel good? And I think you see this in lots of practices, don't you? The Buddhist metta practice of loving
Yeah.
kindness. How do you feel about the value in us wishing for others to be happy, wishing kind thoughts to others?
This is a tough question. That said, I think imagine a world where we all practice loving kindness and how that might help people not compound problems that are happening. So the thing is, it's like it costs nothing. It makes us feel good. The studies show it's helpful. So I think there's really no harm in trying to do that. And I think the other thing is when our brains are relaxed, we're in a more creative space. We're able to problem solve better. So we may be able to think up creative, nonviolent solutions in response to challenges or help people. And again, even if a conflict is happening in one location, the fallout is global. And so your kindness and your being centered and experiencing that inner peace affects the people around you. And, that's kind of magical. I'm sure we have lots of meditators on this. And I know, Mark, you have a meditation practice that when you feel relaxed and in that state, you're able to think in a different way. It feels like.
I agree. I think that when I've had the chance to cultivate a sense of loving kindness, that it does have the ability to potentially affect how I behave to others in the sort of way I am, in a way that affects how they behave towards us and the way they are. And at a global level, if we were to do more of that, it would have a profound effect on our culture. And I think that's really what Action for Happiness is all about: changing culture through everyday small acts of
Yeah.
well-being, kindness, and connection. And these things do make a difference, but they aren't going to necessarily solve a remote conflict in the moment. I think we should be realistic about that. But a sort of the creation of a shift in thinking, I think it is really powerful. I'd like to come in a moment
Mark,
sorry.
I was going to say that's practical optimism. I love that.
Yeah.
So, and it's true. And that's the thing. We're always interacting with the world in little ways, whether it's popping, I like it. We're all doing it by popping things in the chat, by posting things, by talking to people. And if we're in a space where we're feeling mindful, we're feeling peaceful ourselves, that can only have a ripple of good. And I forgot the term earlier, and I just want to say I love and it's a UK term, if I understand the virtuous circle. That's not something that I hear a lot in the US, but I love that because it's so true. It's these ripple effects of good that happen with kindness. And it's not just with health, it's also with society as well.
That's a really nice point, because so much of what we see in society is kind of this zero-sum game. If I succeed, you lose, or if everyone's achievement is relative to each other. So if one goes up, another goes down. And kindness is one of those sort of win-win things where you benefit, the giver and receiver benefits, and then the people who are watching that also benefit because they're inspired. And it sort of, again, with the healthy boundaries, just has this sort of amplifying effect of making things nicer and calmer and wiser, I think. But of course, it's some people are in really difficult situations, and I'd just like to pay tribute to the fact that lots of people are suffering a lot, both physically and emotionally. And Owen's asked a really important
Yeah.
question. Can you explain how one can strengthen the capacity to be kind when we're dealing with physical pain and discomfort? So Owen says he is a chronic pain sufferer, and pain can often affect his willingness or capacity to be kind.
Yeah. So first acknowledging that I think is the important part. And because there's that whole idea that naming it to taming it helps reduce some of the emotional valence around it. And then this gets at that idea that I think when we've experienced suffering or when it's something that's ongoing, that in itself is such an incredible opportunity to grow in compassion and to recognize other people are suffering out there. And I think, I see it in my profession. People who have experienced pain are so much better at giving care to other people oftentimes because they know what it's like to have to wake up and get through a day when it's really difficult. So I want to tell him thank you and hang in there. And I'm really glad that he shared his experience as well.
Yeah, like well said. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Owen, as well. We're rapidly getting towards the end of our time together, and I know there's lots more great questions, but I wanted to sort of come back to the action aspect of this. You've given us so many inspiring reasons why we should be trying to cultivate more kindness, both to ourselves and others. You've given us loads of great practical tips of ways we can do that. But I always love hearing how people are going to try to act on this. So I wondered maybe, Kelly, if we could turn to the audience and ask them for some of the sort of kind things that they might be doing as a result of this, or over the days ahead. How would you like to frame that? Maybe you could ask the audience a question around their plans for kindness.
So first of all, just to back up a little bit. So there's so many different ways to be kind. And again, it can be being kind to another human being, to an animal. It can be being kind by creating kinder environments. So thinking about your neighborhood. And it can also be about being kind to, or broader community. And I think it can also be about being kind to your brain. One thing we didn't touch on, but is actually kind of awesome, is like the whole education stuff, like taking a class has got all these like ripples of benefits and all the health benefits of education, which it turns out is like, for every one life saved by biomedicine, education saves 8 for our educators on the call. And also there are all these sort of different ways to be kind. So think creatively. And I guess I would just love, because I love the action part of this, is can you think of one thing that you could do this week that would add a little kindness to the world? And it can be, again, anything, small or big.
Love that. So can you think of one thing you can do to spread a bit more kindness in the world? So I'm saying this: be more patient, take my elderly neighbor for a coffee, hold open the door.
Oh,
Someone
Fiona, I
shared a
love
lovely
that.
poem of kindness as well, which is great. Reduce my carbon footprint, reconnect with friends, listen, give blood, call my dad, volunteer, let people go ahead of me in the line, ask for help. Well said.
Ooh,
Let
yeah.
others go first, treating a friend to a free coffee, be a good listener, join a community group, say thank you. These are just really powerful and very moving, but actually also, then they don't cost the earth, do they? These are just, um, you know, everyday ways that we can make a difference. Which ones are jumping out for you?
A lot of them, phoning a friend, smiling at people. And I think that's the idea, is giving a compliment. Also, I should mention, I challenge my kids sometimes to also practice some of this. So you can ask if you have family members at home, if there's something that they might want to do as their own kindness challenge, and maybe you can do something to celebrate if you do what you intend. And even just like smiling once at a stranger is a step, using the tiny habits model that I know BJ Fogg has talked about. But again, it tends to build on itself, and deeply listen. I'm seeing and send thank you notes, like all these beautiful things that make us all feel good. And, just coming back to this idea of feeling better with kindness, I think that really gets to it. Is, life is difficult things happen. There are real challenges in the world, and we have to acknowledge that. We can also all make it a little bit better for each other with these small acts of kindness. And I just want to say thank you to everybody on this call, and to Mark, and to the Action for Happiness team. You're doing a remarkable thing. And for those of you that have not taken one of the courses, I had the opportunity to take one this fall, and I loved it. And I thought it really is like walking the walk of all of the things that kindness can offer. And it builds community, and hearing about other people's experiences, and also realizing we're human, and to cut ourselves some slack too. So I think anyway, I just really admire the work that's happening here. And for every single person on this call, thank you for contributing.
Kelly, that's so lovely of you to say, and you've been such a great advocate of this mission that we share together about trying to create a happier and kinder world together. I wanted to just say thank you also to everyone who's been involved in this and who's supported the Action for Happiness community, for being here today, but also for the donations people have chosen to make to support the Action for Happiness charity to help make these sort of things available. So continue to spread the word, please, folks. But I just have been particularly inspired by all these lovely examples of everyday kindness. And I think, I should play the game too. My one that came to me was just to, whenever I feel frustrated, to try to look for the good with whoever it is that's causing that frustration and trying to name that, which is a difficult one for me. But actually, almost always when there's someone who's doing something that frustrates me, they have a good characteristic too. And if I can see that, I might be able to respond in a wiser way. That's what I'm working on. Well, what about you, Kelly? What's your action for kindness as you go forward this week?
I am, gosh, I feel very inspired by all the different actions. I have an overdue thank you note to someone who's made a real difference in my life that I am going to do this week. So thank you all for encouraging me to do that.
I'm so glad you mentioned thank you notes because they're so powerful. To receive something like that is amazing. So we're running out of time. I just wanted to mention again your fantastic book called The Rabbit Effect. I'm not actually sure if we even talked about what the rabbit effect is, did we, Kelly?
It's funny. We never got to the rabbit story. Sure. So the rabbit effect, for those of you I don't know or who haven't read the book, it was this study that was done back in the late 1970s, and really an awesome scientific study in the sense that some of the best studies are ones that you get a result that you totally were not looking for, but it's life-changing and world-changing. And so this was one of those studies. So this researcher named Dr. Robert Neerum was studying heart health in rabbits and diet. And he gave all these genetically identical or virtually genetically identical rabbits the same high-fat diet. And he expected them all to have the same health outcome. And sure enough, when it came time to look at the results, one group of rabbits had way better health outcomes than all the other rabbits. And they thought it was a mistake. They double checked, everything checked out. And then they realized that the person who was caring for that group of rabbits wasn't just feeding the rabbits. She was actually picking up the rabbits. She was talking to the rabbits. She was petting them. She was basically giving them love and kindness. And the results were dramatic. It was like a 60% difference in health compared to this group of rabbits to the others. And they thought, could it really be that made a difference? And in fact, they repeated the study, got the exact same results, published it in the journal Science. And then, like many medical studies, it sort of just went quietly on the shelf. I talk about it because it's really, in many ways, the beginning of this revolution of how we think about health in a much broader context than just our bodies individually, that we are part of this interconnected system. We all play a role. We all have an opportunity to both contribute and receive. And it's what makes life meaningful and fun. And so this event today has been super duper fun, Mark, and it's always a pleasure to hang out with you and your community and this community. So thank you.
Kelly, thank you so much. That's a perfect note to end on. Really grateful for all of your time, and keep up the inspiring work. See you again.
I like the rabbit emojis. Thank you.